4.2c, we're going to identify experimental units or subjects, the explanatory variable and factors, treatments, and the response variable in an experiment. So we've talked about explanatory variable and response. Let's talk about treatment and experimental units. A treatment is a specific condition applied to individuals in an experiment. A common treatment might be a medical company wanting to test out a new type of aspirin. Their treatment might be the aspirin they give the individuals. What are the experimental units? They are the smallest collection of individuals to which treatments are applied. So if the treatment was to give an aspirin, the experimental units would be to the individuals taking the aspirins. Now, sometimes the experimental units are actually people, and in that case, they may be referred to as subjects. So when the units are people, they're called subjects. Another word for the factors would be also known as the explanatory variables within an experiment. So if we are going to use aspirin to maybe explain lowering heart disease, the aspirin is our treatment, but in the case the aspirin is the explanatory variable for heart disease, we also can call it a factor within the experiment. And the other thing, factors may have levels. So maybe if the factor is the aspirin, what's the level of aspirin? Maybe one person takes 1 aspirin, somebody else takes 2 aspirin, somebody else takes 3 aspirin. The level of that factor could happen to varying degrees depending on how the experiment is designed. So let's look at this situation and define the experimental units, the explanatory variable, response variable, and treatments or factors. A study published in the New England Journal of Medicine compared 2 medicines to treat a head lice. There was an oral application of the medicine, and then there was a lotion application. Researchers studied 812 people in 376 households in 7 areas of the world. Of the 185 randomly assigned to the oral medication, 171 were free from head lice for 2 weeks, compared to only 151 of the 191 households randomly assigned to the lotion. So what you're seeing here is our sample was 376 households, 185 of them were on the oral medicine, and 191 were on the topical lotion. So the question here is identify the experimental units. Who was this treatment being tested on? Be careful, the experimental units in this case were the households, not the actual people. It foots back to the 376 households. What was the explanatory variable that they were using? They were using the medicine to actually explain the control for head lice. So the explanatory variable is the type of medicine. This could also be considered a factor for that case. Now, the type of medicine was going to impact the response. What was the response? Well, it was dealing with the head lice. The response is whether the household was free of head lice or not. So our explanatory to our response variable. Now, our explanatory variable is a factor. What treatments were there for that? There were actually 2 different levels of treatments. There was either the lotion or the actual oral medicine. So in this case, there's 1 factor or 1 type of treatment of medicine, but there's 2 levels of treatments, either the oral medication or the topical lotion. So in this case, 1 factor has 2 levels for its treatments. Let's look at one more example here. Growing tomatoes. Does fertilizer affect the productivity of tomatoes? How about the amount of water given to the plants? So we're looking at here, again, fertilizer, and we're looking at water. To answer these, a gardener plants 24 similar tomato plants in identical pots in a greenhouse. He will add fertilizer to the soil in half the pots. He will also add water, 8 of the plants with a half a gallon of water per day, 8 of the plants with 1 gallon of water per day, and the remaining 8 with 1.5 gallons of water per day. At the end of 3 months, he will record the total weight of the tomatoes produced on each plant. Identify these same components here. So the experimental units in this case, who's the experiment happening to, are the tomato plants, obviously. Now let's talk about the explanatory variable, or the factors. In this case, there are two factors to this experiment. There is the fertilizer and there is the water. So we can highlight here that whether the fertilizer is applied is one factor, the second is the amount of water. What will the response be to these two factors that are being applied? Well, the weight of the tomatoes being produced. He's going to record up here, it says the total weight. That's what's going to be measured. Now list the treatments for this. Each of these two factors actually has three unique treatments. So be careful. Remember, he's going to fertilize half of the plants, but then water them in three different types of groups. So the first treatment would be, let's say he does the fertilizer to all of them. So he's going to give fertilizer to the plants, but that's going to vary. The first one might have a half a gallon of water, the second will have 1 gallon, and the third will have 1.5. So there's three treatments right there with having different levels. The other treatment option is what if there's no fertilizer on the plants, but you could still have the different watering options of a half a gallon, 1 gallon, and 1.5. Based on that, we're going to see that there are actually 6 different treatments to this particular scenario. So we have 2 factors at 3 different levels, which gives us the 6 treatments.